So before we get into doing any body modification stuff, I would like to go back. So did everybody, so did Katie, did that end up showing up? Because it's seeing the drive, I mean, the drive is getting power, so the connection part is being made.
Yeah.
Let's try this.
I just updated my system this morning.
Oh, well. Hey guys, can I give you a little advice about updating systems? Not to call anyone out here. About updating systems, I will tell you when I update a system. I update my systems whenever some little green man comes to my house, pulls out a gun and holds it to my head and says, if you don't update, I'm going to shoot you and your wife dead. And then I bargain. Just shoot me or shoot me dead. Can you just like flesh wound? Because if it's just a flesh wound, I'm not updating. Yeah, that's some issue that you've got going here. I'm going to see if I can get you a jump drive that might...
Well, if someone was able to airdrop me the files?
Oh, sure. Jose, can you airdrop Katie the files that we are supposed to be working on? And I'm sorry? You need the... what was I going to say? Oh, wait, did the sign-in list go around? Did everybody get on that? Are we good? Oh, and I got it back. Never mind. Did you get them, Sarah? Do they work, Katie?
Yeah.
Perfect, okay. She also got all your credit cards and everything else, Jose, but other than that, don't worry about it. So that's me down there. Not that. Go back. It's... Oh, it is? No, that's not what I want you to copy. Hit cancel out of that. Start stop. Click on my hard drive again. You want to copy...
Oh, no, I need to turn it back.
Oh, you're turning that in. Got it. Oh, I thought you were actually looking for the stuff that I was asking you to copy off of this that I don't even see on there anymore. Okay. So everybody has these files of Jose, right? Okay. Are we good? Okay. So with the files of Jose, just find them. You can do this here. You can do this directly from the Finder, or you can do it from Bridge. You can actually do it from Lightroom. You can actually even do this from Capture One. You could drag them straight in from Capture One. I'll show you what that actually looks like. So in my case, I need you guys to find the 4 files that you actually copied over. So it's this 201907. It's all 4 of these guys. So if you select the very top one, number 51, hold down your Shift key and select the bottom one and drag all of that on top of Photoshop. It will load all 4 of them into Camera Raw. I'm going to actually show it to you from Capture One. So in Capture One, if again you do the exact same thing, I'm selecting the 051 at the top, down to 54 at the bottom, holding down the Shift key. I've got 4 slides, 4 images that are now selected, and you can simply drag those directly into Photoshop from Capture One, and the same thing will happen, and it will actually bring all 4 of these into for us to be able to work on. So is this working? Yes.
I have a question about if you wanted to if you did a session in Capture One and you wanted to export all those photos to a folder somewhere or get them out of Capture One,
Yes. Sure. Hold that thought, and I will, okay? So in this case, I've got these 4 guys going on right here, but in some cases when people do composite work like this, they'll stack, they'll have like 20 of these exposures, whatever. And to build this layer at a time is a real pain in the ass. But, so what I could do, so I could do this. I'm going to show you a couple ways of doing this, and we'll go from there. So we'll do first things first, the simplest way. The first thing is this color balanced? No, I need to color balance. It looks really warm to me. Don't you guys agree with that part? So I need to figure out what the color balancing on this thing will actually be. How would you go about color balancing this? Say what? Yeah, the white balance tool would be the first thing I would go after, right? So that's what we're going to do. I've just got the very top one is active. It's the only one that you need to be active right now. Click on the white balancing tool, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to simply click on the board that's behind Jose. And because it had detail in it, it had enough detail in it, it would actually be fine to go. I want to show you something else really quickly, though. I'm going to undo that. If you come up here to like the white that's up at the very top, so I'm clicking on one of those lights. Now again, that light had completely nuked out, and you can see I've got a reading of 255, 255. If I try to white balance on that, usually you will get a warning that comes up, and this is the warning, and it says that the clickable area is too bright to set the white balance. Please look for something less bright. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. I'm hovering over this area right down in here, and you can see I've got a 251, 241, whatever. I've got some room to actually move in here. So when I click on that, it actually does a fairly good job of doing a good white balance. You can also try the door. If you click on the door, you'll get a slightly different version. Actually, I like that one a little bit better because it's a little bit warmer. That doesn't mean it's perfect or neutral, but it appeals to me more. Does that sort of make sense? So, and a lot of times people go around, you can actually click on other things. There's a purse right here that probably has white in it, and you can see it shifts it a little bit more. That's a little bit cooler. There's a, it's a notebook. I wouldn't trust a notebook. I don't trust metal, but I do trust labels. There is a G on this bottle right here that probably should be neutral. And that's the neutral that I get from that guy. There's also an earbud right here. I could click on that guy. That should also be neutral. So you guys can see that there's an enormous range. The knot on the bag might also be neutral. Yeah, they're all pretty consistent. But at any rate, then to apply this very same thing to everybody else, you come up to the drop-down menu by film strip and do a select all, and you can see that the other 3 have been selected, and then right back up to that same menu and come down and do sync settings. And this will allow you to then apply. The only thing we have changed on this was the white balance. So this is the only thing. Most of the times I will come up here and sync everything. I want everything that I've done to be synced. So I'll go ahead and say okay to that. And you can see now that we've got 4 files that are also still selected. And you can see because I have actually set up to open all the smart objects in my option for in the way my option to actually open this now into Photoshop is sitting down here as open as objects. So I could go ahead and do that. So I'm going to, again, simply, I want to open all of these. So I'm going to open this up into Photoshop, and it's going to go through a series of opening 4 of these guys for me. Okay, and all 4 are open. I've still got the retouching that we were doing open, so I'm going to close her up to get rid of that, and I don't need to save my version of it. You guys do. And again, in this case right now, I'm seeing through Photoshop 2. Capture 1 is in the background for me. I don't like that. It gets too confusing for me. So when that happens, simply come up to Photoshop down to Hide Others, and then you're just in the Photoshop window. And you can see, like again, if you're the person, if you're using tabbed behavior and you're fine with that, that's great. I don't care. But you can see in my case, I've got 4 images that are simply sitting out here, and it's 4 independent ones. It does not matter what order you really do this in. Sometimes, though, it helps if you can sort of keep track of what you're doing. So I'm going to find the file that had Jose up at the very beginning. It was the first frame I took. Number 51, you can see it's right there. To actually select the others, you can go around and look for them. You can actually try to find 52 and 53. If you have the tabs, it'll be named right across the top, and you simply pick the other one. But you can also come up to the window menu, and at the very bottom of your window menu here, this allows you to actually scroll through any of your images that are actually open. So I'm going to pick number 52 here right now, and I'm going to grab the layer from 52, and I'm going to drag it on to 51, hold down the Shift key so that they come into alignment, and let go. Does that make sense what's going on here? And I'm going to do this process for all 4 of them. However, there is an easier way. So imagine you've got 50 of these files to do. Do you worry about getting lost in all of that? Yeah, you have a huge worry about getting lost in all of that. So yes?
I'm sorry, the process to drag over 52 was to select it.
So drag here from 52 onto the image of 51 and hold down your Shift key. Otherwise, they don't come in and register. Does that make sense? So instead, I'm going to ask you to close all of these up. You don't need to save any of them. But what we do need to do, so I'm going to do, you can actually, there's a faster way to close all of these. You can go through one of them at a time, or you can come up to the File menu down to Close All, and it'll say, do you want to save any of this stuff? And I can say, I'm going to apply this to all of my images. I don't want to save them. And they'll all close up and you'll get rid of them. Again, when you're working with 4 images, it's not that big of a deal. When you're working with 400, it's a huge deal. Make sense? Okay, if we go out and take a look now at the folder where that came from, you'll notice that there are now 4 XMP files in here as well. And this is the trick. What we're going to do in Photoshop right now is we're going to actually use a script in Photoshop to load all 4 of these as layers into one single file. And that would be great, except for the fact that we don't get the color option step. We don't get a step to open this as a color, to do the color correction. But because I've already done the color correction, it's sitting in these XMP files. When this script runs and goes to load these things as layers, it respects the color settings that were set up in the XMP data. So these will come in as color corrected. They will not be that super warm color that the raw file was by itself. Does that sort of make sense? So to do this, go back into Photoshop. It's initiated from inside of Photoshop. So we're actually in Photoshop and come up to the File menu and come down to Scripts. And inside of Scripts, if you come across, there's this thing that says Load Files into Stack. And if you say OK to that, it'll say, OK, what files do you want to load into a stack? This dialog box will open up. You need to click on the Browse button, and you need to go find those images wherever they were. So for me, it is in the Pictures folder inside my last of my sessions in my Capture folder. It's these 4 files right here. You can actually select the XMPs. It won't matter. It won't allow you to select them. So I've got all 4 of these selected. Has everybody got this part? All right. So in Photoshop, yeah, it's asking you to browse. So no, go ahead and click on Browse. You're in the right spot. You need to just find those 4 files wherever you airdropped them. No, they'd be at the top because they're named it. The name is 201907. You can do a search in here or try 20190729. There they are. And grab all 4 of those. And then hit open. So once you hit open, it will actually preview that for you in that initial dialog box, and they're all sitting right here. Now at this stage of the game, you can actually do a number of things. So here, it says after doing this, they can load smart objects. The downside to doing what we're doing right now is we're not bringing in real smart objects. We're not bringing in raw data smart objects. We could convert these to regular ones after the fact, but we're missing that part out of this game. But when you're doing smart objects, most of this stuff work is destructive anyway, so you're going to have to rasterize these layers anyway, so you're not really going to be working with smart objects a lot. But just realize that that's a liability. If you need the smart object raw data, bring it in one at a time and just load them up. You can actually attempt to automatically align these. If you're not working on a tripod like I did, this would actually be a smart thing to check. So Let's say, for instance, I was doing this instead. I was hand holding it like this, and this is pretty steady. And I shot all of them like this without moving as much as I could. There's going to be a slight variation in this. That automatically align will do wonders for actually aligning these guys together. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and check it just anyway. And then here, sort by name just allows you, they're already sorted by name, but this would allow you to actually put a different layer order that was on here. Does that sort of make sense what's going on? So again, I'm simply going to click on this attempt to adjust a source manually and say OK. Well, so here's the issue right now. So that this is now, the file that's coming in here is no longer the raw data. I can still turn this into a smart object, but it doesn't benefit. It protects the file, but it doesn't benefit from having the raw data. When you double click on the smart object here, you simply open up an already baked file in a new window. You don't have the raw data. Make sense? Yes. It's doing what?
Every time like it happened in camera raw too. Like everything is turning into a hand, even though I'm changing.
Oh, all of your tools are hands now? Yeah, great. That's also. So save this file.
Save these files?
No, save the whole thing. Just save it as an image. Call it Simple Composite. And put it someplace where you can find it. Okay. Quit Photoshop. Okay, so before you launch Photoshop, hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and then start Photoshop. Command, Option, Shift, and then start Photoshop. Keep holding them down. Oh, you let go too. Oh, it's taking you. No, hold those. Command, Option, Shift, and then start Photoshop. And then say yes. And then we will reset this during lunch, okay? But right now you can still start to go up to your file menu, come down to Open Recent, or Open. Yeah, it's not. It's erased all that. So it's that guy. And again, we'll reset all of this. But now see if your brush tools become brush tools. Okay, so to do this, guys, if you actually turn off the eyeball for the very top layer right here, you'll actually see Jose move. And if you turn off the next one, you see him move again. And if you turn off the next one, you see him move again. And then the last one is really a base that we're going to work on. So I'm going to leave this bottom one on. I'm going to turn on all the other layers as well. I take it back. Let's do it from the bottom. We'll work from the bottom and on our way up. So I'm going to turn off the top 3 eyeballs. And you can see the one for me on the bottom was number 54. So it's actually Jose back on the phone. Has everybody got that part? Okay, I'm going to turn on this eyeball here, right here, and take a look. And this is actually where Jose was sitting right here in this corner chair, or the chair is where Katya is right now. Does that sort of make sense? So I'm going to put a layer mask on this guy that actually hides everything. To do that, there's a couple of options. The first one is you can simply add a layer, wrong layer, make the second one active, add a layer mask to this guy, and then hit Command-I to invert it. Or with this layer selected, simply hold down the Option key, and when you click on Add Layer Mask, it adds a black one. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, I'm going to double click on the hand to get this thing as big as it can be for me to actually be able to work on. And I know that Jose is in this area somewhere in here. I am going to change this to make sure that this is a completely soft brush. Again, you don't need to worry about the, well, you'll spot the hardness if you do it too hard. You've got to change, keep your blending mode as normal, your opacity at 100%, and take your flow all the way back up to 100% again. So again, I've got a soft brush. I've got a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and 100% flow. And I know Jose is in this area right in here. Is that good for everyone? I'm going to hit the D key to make sure that my foreground and background colors default to black and white. And then I'm simply going to paint Jose back in. And you can see that you don't need to care at all about how good your masking is, because these two layers share the exact same information. If you want to see only what you're really seeing, what I'm showing right here, hold down the Option key and click on this eyeball. That's my masking right there. And you can see it's totally soft edges, but none of this matters because I was on that tripod. All of this stuff is simply completely matching up. So you don't have to worry about making selections. You don't have to worry about how good your masking is. You can just hack this. I need to make sure that Jose's legs are not underneath this table, so you can actually watch this in real time. Again, I'm still working on my layer mask, still with my brush, and simply going to paint down here. And you can see maybe, I don't see it. I was worried if I saw his feet under there. Say what?
I see a shadow but no feet.
Yeah, so you need to pay attention to those exact things though, because that part matters. Okay, so I'm going to turn this guy back on. I'm going to go to my next layer now, the one that's number 52, and I'm going to turn him on and off. And 52 is actually Jose right here in this sort of middle part. So it's right sort of underneath the light fixtures right there. So again, same trick. I've got this layer is actually selected. Hold down the Option key and click on Add Opaque Layer Mask. Grab the B key to get a brush, make sure white is your foreground color, and simply paint in this version of Jose. Now you'll see here, I've run into a problem. My brush is so soft that it's beginning to cover part of the original image of Jose sitting in the background. So I'm going to zoom in tight to this area. You can see he's beginning to disappear in the background. I don't want that to actually happen. So I'm going to change my brush from, I'm not going to go to 100% hard brush, but I'm going to really crank it up. I'm going to go up to like a 90% hardness here. That'll control a lot of my overspray. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to hit the X key to get black to bring my foreground color because I need to hide this. This is what is happening. I'll show it to you. I'm just going to hold down the Option key and click on it. It's this area right over here is beginning to hide that original base layer image. So I need to bring that back. So again, working on my layer mask with black as my foreground color, I need to hide this area that was the original Jose. And you can sort of see where this is beginning to go and how you might need to get actually a pen tool or something else in there to actually get it to work. But that ends up being pretty good right now. Again, I'm going to hold down the Option key and take a look, and you can see I've had to get really close to that edge. If I needed to be perfectly on that edge, I might have to do this with a little bit of pen tool work, but for the most part, it seems to be pretty good right now. I'm going to double click on the hand finally one more time and click on my top image, and you can see it's the one where Jose is right here in his original seat. So again, make this layer active and hold down the Option key and click on Add Layer Mask so it hides everything. Hit the B key to get a brush. Again, flip your foreground and colors back to white as your foreground color. I simply hit the X key to do it, and then simply paint in Jose. And again, anything that's doubled up in here, whatever is, and that is now the simplest, fastest composite in the world that you can do. Make sense? Are there questions about this? All right, so if you then wanted to work on this collectively, let's say that there's something you needed to do on this, you wanted to do split frequency work right now. Let's say for some reason you wanted to do that. Again, make sure that your very top layers, well, I should tell you this really quickly first. Do this with me, everybody, please. Everybody needs to inspect their masks right now, because if you've got a hole in your mask, we need to spot it. So to inspect the mask, you hold down the Option key and simply click on the mask, and you can see I've got a hole right here. That is a mistake. So I can work directly on the mask. Again, I've still got my brushes selected. So is my mask. White is my foreground color. I can simply fix that. Again, hold down the Option key and click on the mask that's underneath it. And you'll see that this is where things actually got fixed right in here. So that part's actually going to be good for me. And then finally, click on this last one, and I don't spot any holes in that one at all. So again, then I'm simply going to click on my top layer. Oh, and this is an interesting one. And you'll see that you've got this, it looks like this red thing all over your mask. Has this happened to you guys before? It's happening to some of you right now. So what's going on here is this. If you actually take a look in your layers palette right here, you can see that there is a layer mask that's right here. I'm sorry, not the layers palette, the channels palette. And there's an eyeball. This mask has actually been turned on. You need to turn the eyeball off and you get rid of that red. Make sense to everyone? Okay, so, but I want to do split frequency work on this entire image now. And I've got 4 layers in here. That's not possible for me to do. So to do the split frequency work, make sure that you have the very top of your layers is selected and active. Hold down Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E, and it will build a composite of all of these. This is now a merge stamp version of everybody sitting on top. For me, I would start this as my new version. Michael? That collapsed everyone. So make sure that you've got the very top layer selected. And then Command. No, you're not. It's Command, Option, Shift, and E. You're missing the option. There you go. So for me, at this stage of the game, I would treat this as my new version. Again, you need a version to have one in there. So I would simply call this version or new version. And then I would copy the first one of this and rename it low. And make a copy of that. And call it high. And then, again, blur the low layer, subtract the high layer from it, duplicate both of them. It's the same frequency separation stuff we've been doing. Are there questions about this? Is this working for you guys? Connor?
So with the frequency separation workflow you showed us, that's something where as long as you're building in those copies for the destructive layering,
Right.
that maybe say like the last edits you do are the getting out the fallout.
The spill.
The spill.
Yeah.
And then is sharpening perhaps the last step?
Sharpen would always be the last step. So that actually brings me up. No, that's a great point because we should have this conversation right now. There is a layer order that matters, and it matters radically, and it's the layer order is this. So I'm going to work from the bottom of this chart all the way up. So it always starts with the virgin at the bottom. Then the very first thing that we do on top of this is pixel work. So what is pixel work? Pixel work is clone stamping tool. It's frequency separation work. It's all of that kind of work. It would be clone stamping work. Again, that happens first. The next thing that follows up here is tonal. This is where you do all your tonal work. And the reason you want to do it in this order is you guys can you see back there, Katya?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Are we reading bottom up?
Bottom up. So this is your base layer. We're working our way up because this is the order you would do it in. So the virgin always stays the virgin. Your first work is your pixel work. So anything that needs to be replaced, clone stamping, frequency separation, any of those issues here, all of that pixel work happens first. Then tonal happens after that. And the reason you want it to be in this order is that tonal will always show through your pixel work. If you flip these two, if you put pixel on top of tonal and you make a change to your pixel layer, it hides the tonal work and you can't see it anymore. So it always goes in this order. So after tonal is color. After color is liquefy. And then finally sharpen is at the very end. And the reason sharpen is always at the end is that you need to do different sharpening for different output. So if you want to use I usually don't do sharpening at all until I'm actually ready to do the output. You could, it just makes your files bigger and there's no real advantage to doing it. But in the sharpening layer at the top, also what you should be doing is you should be doing a merge stamp version of all of these so that you sharpen the entire image. What a lot of people mistake when they do sharpening is that the very last layer they have up will only have part of the image. It won't be the whole thing. So they only end up sharpening part of the image, and that's not what you want to do. Does this sort of make sense? And it pretty much always goes this way. Because again, you sharpen different for screen than you would for a small print, than you would for a big print, than you would for, depending on the different kinds of printers. A CMYK printer is a lot uglier and dirtier than a inkjet printer. So all of them would be specific to whatever you were doing it for. Okay, are there any questions about any of this so far? Okay, good. I'm going to show you an old school. We are going to actually start into doing body transform right now. So again, I will just say this one more time. This is strictly a tool set. This is not, you can imagine doing this on anything. An apple, a building, your dog, whatever. So I'm trying to assure everyone that I'm sensitive to all of the implications about all this kind of work. And if it's the work that you choose not to do, that's great. At least you'll know what it is and yeah, okay. So the next image I want everybody to open up if they can for me quickly is, again, it's going to be in, I think it's going to be in class number 9. It is. It's this thing called digitaldiet.psd. If you could open that up for me really quickly. So, right off the bat, let me ask you, how many of you guys have spent any time at all, liquefying images? Okay, so a few of you have got a little bit of experience of this. Well, Liquify hasn't always, and Liquify, when it works well, it works really well, but it isn't the only tool in the tool shed to actually use. And there was a time that existed where Liquify didn't exist. And so with that in mind, I'm going to show you how we would actually retouch this old school. Because sometimes it works actually better, I think, than Liquify, or I don't know. Liquify has actually gotten to be pretty good, though, so I've got to admit I probably wouldn't use this, but I do want to show this to you just so that we understand what's really going on here. So when I first saw this image, now I've already told you guys my Twiggy story, right? Okay, so for me, when I became sexually aware, girls who had boy bodies were really in, so whether you believe that or not, I embrace the idea that I have been stamped that way, and so those are the decisions when I look at those things, they're the things that I choose to do. The very first time, though, I did this file for a class of students who were actually retouching it, and I said, I'm going to narrow down her hips. One of the people in the class said, are you kidding me? She has perfect hips. And it was like, okay, so again, there's no right or wrong in this discussion. There's simply, I think I want to do this, and how do I do this, and then let's do it. And then we'll go from there. Does that sort of make sense? All right, so we're just going to do this pretty quick. So in order to do the tool that I'm going to show you guys right now, it's simply a simple transform. That's all we're going to do. I'm going to come in here, and all I really want to do is I want to narrow down this thigh part just a little bit. I want to push in the bottom a little bit. I want to knock a little bit off this edge just a little bit. That's all I really want to do on this. To use the tool that we're going to use, though, we need to actually make a selection and put this all on its own layer. So to do that, hit the L key to get a lasso, and then we need to make a pretty good size selection of this. You don't want to make these selections too small, because what ends up happening is that you'll get the exact shape that you want, but you won't be able to refeed the new shape back into the original file because you cut. So for instance, what I'm saying is you don't want to come along and try to cut along this very top like this, like that. That's not what you want to do. You actually want to grab quite a bit of this. I'm going to grab a big chunk of this. So I'm catching part of her shirt up here in the top. I'm going to come down through her crotch. I'm going to grab her entire knee, and then I'm going to come back. And this is the selection that I'm going to make. It gives me, but there's a trade-off here. The transform tools that I'm going to show you are specific to the selection that we're going to make. And so the smaller the selection that you make, the more precise you can actually be with these tools. So with that in mind, I'm going to reduce some of this selection. It's a little bit too big. To reduce it, I've still got the lasso tool is selected. Hold down the Option key, and you'll see it changes. It adds a little minus sign to your crosshair. And then I'm going to simply come through the very top, and I'm going to knock off a little bit of that selection. So this is the selection that I actually want to work with. Everybody good on this? All right, I'm going to jump it to its own layer, Command J. And if you turn off the background now, you can actually see this is what we've actually got sitting out there, and this is what we're going to try to transform. I'm going to turn the background layer back on. I've got layer number 1 is actually selected and active. I am going to then drop its opacity slightly. I'm going to kick it down to like a 75% because I need to see, well, I take it back. I'll leave it up 100% right now, and we'll take a look. I'll show you this in just a second because you can do it all at the same time. I've got my layer number 1. Actually, it's active and selected. I am actually then going to come over to my edit menu and I'm going to come down to free transform or simply hit Command T. We've done this a million times already. So with Command T selected, you can do all sorts of things with this. You can do all sorts of transforms, and they are stackable. So here's one of the things that we're not going to, I want you to go ahead and do this with me, but I just want you to see what's really going on here. So one of the first things, for instance, I can do is I can simply grab a corner here and drag it in, and it is a scaling. But I can also come up to my edit menu and I can come down, and all of these other transforms are available to me. So for instance, if I come down and say I want to distort, let's try perspective. I want to do a perspective on this. You'll notice with perspective what happens is if we come down to this same corner that I just did that with, I can click and drag it up like this, which causes the lower part of this image to get larger. The upper part does not change in scale, and as a consequence, it gives you the illusion that you are looking, that you are raising that knee up, and you are then looking, becoming foreshortened. Does that sort of make sense what's going on? But all of these things continue to be addable. So you can, for instance, even though we are in the perspective control right now, if you come up to the, again, edit menu down to transform, you could go to distort. And what distort will do is it actually makes all of these points independent. So if we grab this very same corner again, we can actually move it, and you'll notice that nothing else, it's not moving. With perspective, those 2 points in the front were connected to one another. They're no longer connected to one another. So the reason I'm showing you all of this is to say when you do these transforms, it doesn't have to be, you can continue to use new tool in the transform setup dialog box without finally ever committing the transform. So you can get it right, is what I guess I'm trying to say. Okay, the little circle at the very top and the options menu at the very top that's got the slash through it, if you click on that, it undoes any of the work that we've already done here. And then I'm simply going to go back into it again, Command T, transform dialog box. In one of the transforms, if you come up to the edit menu down at the very bottom, you'll see this thing at the bottom that says warp. They've actually given a dedicated icon to warp. So you can go after it this way. You could come here and select it right here. And if you want to, go ahead and select it right there. Otherwise, it's this other little guy that sits right next to the 3 controls that are sitting up at the top. It's the one that looks like a, sort of like a graph that's been bent, the graph that's sitting on top of an arc. Either way, click this guy or do the other one, and you get this series of, it's a grid that lays over on this. And this is why I said you want to do this on a small layer, because this grid now is controlling only this small little layer that we jumped to its own layer. If I was working on a copy of the background, this grid would be laid over the entire background, and it would be much less precise control, because I would be transforming the entire image. I would be transforming background, floor, the sky, the girl, her hair, her hand, everything. Does that sort of make sense? All right, so then to see how this tool works, every one of these little black dots is a control point, and you use them in unison to try to reshape whatever it is you're trying to reshape. So for me, my first move is I'm going to grab this little control handle right here, and you can see if you click on it and move it, it will allow you to push that lower part of the thigh in just a little bit more. And I said I simply wanted to slim that part down. If you then want to push this side of her hip in a little bit right here, there's another control handle over here that'll push it in slightly, and then there's another one up here at the top that will help round that out. Now the problem that I've got right now is that I can't tell what this looks like relative to my original image. So even though we haven't accepted this transform yet, you can drop the opacity of this layer. So simply come over to opacity and drop it down, and now you can sort of get an idea of the before and after. You can see the original line that's sitting down here, and you can see the other one that's sitting up here. Now what I know about this image is that I needed to reconnect right here at where the sweater actually meets her, where the sweater is actually meeting the pant. I want this transform to reconnect there. If not, I've got to pick some place on here where the new transform that I'm doing fits into the old one. So you can't just go in there and push all this shit in and do it. It doesn't work that way. You might as well just scale the image you're going to do if you're going to do that. So for me, I'm going to try to reconnect it right here at her hip. So again, at the sweater, so I'm going to grab this control point up here at the top, and I'm going to play with this back and forth, and you can see I can get those two to line up slightly again right there. I can push in the bottom of the hip a little bit more, and this bottom a little bit more right there. Then I also need it to reconnect with her knee right here. I might be able to get away with using a pen tool and just knocking that line out right there. So I'm going to go ahead and see what happens here. I'm going to go ahead and leave this connection right at the crux of her knee. I'm going to leave it where it is right now because that'll shave that whole thing off. And then I'm simply going to say OK to this. I'm going to click on the checkbox to go ahead and commit that transform. Then I'm going to bring the opacity all the way back up again. And you can see at this stage of the game, just on its own, it actually might work. I would go in and inspect these areas. But in some cases when you do this, you don't want to, because this has now affected her entire leg. It's affected everything. And sometimes you don't want that to happen. Sometimes you just want to control the edge that you want to control. So to do that, we're going to put a black layer mask on this guy. Hold down the Option key and click on Add Layer Mask. It puts on a black mask now so we don't see any of that transform that we just did. Hit the B key to get a brush, make it a much smaller brush. In this case, I'm going to make it a 50% hardness brush. Again, I'm going to accept the fact that I'm going to need a blend of old texture and new texture. So anywhere in the range of 50%, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Click on the word Adobe to get rid of that. Again, working with white now on my black layer mask, I can simply come in here and actually knock that part off. And you can see right down here, I've got a mistake that's happening right down here. It's this edge right here, that edge of her pant line right there, that didn't fall into the transform. So I need to fix that little line right there. I'm going to go to a much smaller brush. I'm going to hit the X key to get black as my foreground color, and I'm going to simply nip that off. Typically, if I was really doing this on a high-end project, whatever, I would go in there with the pen tool and actually make sure that that actually worked. But then this is my transform right now. And so, again, if you just turn the guy on and off, and you can see it does an extremely good job of it, and we didn't get into liquefy at all. Now, in this case, looking at the image, I feel like it's out of balance with her other hip on the other side over here, so I would do the same process on the other side because I feel like this part of her leg right in here is now it's too heavy for how thin this leg is right in here. Are there questions about this? You can even take this slightly further. If you feel like this was too aggressive, I'm going to zoom into this hip again. The mask is actually in the correct spot. If you actually hold down the Command key and click on the mask, you can see the mask is actually in the right place. What may be too heavy in this or too strong in here is the image itself. So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. I'm going to select the image content of this. I'm going to break the link between the image and the mask because the mask is actually in the correct spot. I'm going to actually then, with the brackets around the link right now, hit the V key to get the move tool. And then this would be really small nudges for me. So I try not to do this with a cursor, with a mouse. I don't do this with a mouse or a tablet or whatever. I simply use my arrow keys. So I'm going to start tapping the right arrow key, and you'll see that it just moves that part of the image over slightly. But again, I didn't move the entire thing over. The mask remained in its exact same spot, which is where it should be. But the content of the image has actually moved slightly over. And so that's how I would actually bring that part out. If you want to see the difference in those two, hit Command Z to undo that. So this is before the nudge has happened, right? And I'm worried that I think I went a little too far with it. But to see, I'm going to come over to my history palette. I'm going to click on the little camera at the bottom, and I'm going to call this too far. And then again, with the link broken between the two and the brackets around the image content, I'm going to hit the arrow key over once. I'm going to snapshot that and call this TF -1, too far -1. I'm going to hit that nudge one more time. Again, the arrow key going to the right. I'm going to hit it again, and I'm going to snapshot that and call it TF -2. And you can do this all day long, guys. It's how most people will actually go in and try to preview stuff. And the reason you do it the reason you make snapshots of it is sometimes you're making like 4 or 5 changes to have a different view. and it's too hard to do the 4 or 5 changes really quick, and you want to be able to go back and forth really, really fast. So now if you simply scroll to the very top of your history palette, I've got the original too far one, and you can see that's actually pushed in. I'm going to go to the -1 and to the -2, then I can go back to the -1, I can go back, you can go back through all of these. Does that sort of make sense? So it's just a good way of actually going back and forth. Okay, and you can also use history snapshot states here if you actually wanted to. So for instance, you could paint on this and paint in the position of that guy back again. Are we good on this? Are there questions about any of this? Okay, then we're going to take a quick break here and look at one more artist, and then not one more, but yet again another in our list of artists. Just a quick little slideshow to show you guys. We'll break for lunch, and then when you come back, we'll spend the entire afternoon doing liquefy, all sorts of transforming. Is everybody good on that? Okay. I have not showed you guys Palo Reversi yet, have I? Okay. Anybody in this room? I'm just going to say this. Anybody in this room other than Connor heard of Palo? No. It's just I have yet to stump you, which is a beautiful thing. Again, your history is so critical. Palo Reversi. Anybody else in this room? Okay. Another one of my idols. Wouldn't it be funny though if I came in here and I said, I'm going to show you somebody that I absolutely hate? And Connor, would you mind just killing the other lights? Thanks. So I became aware of Palo Reversi when I first moved to Italy. He is Italian. He actually lives in Paris now. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of the background about Palo Reversi. When I first became aware of him, he was doing a lot of multiple strobe work in images. He was working, I think, primarily in film at this time. He did a lot of work for a magazine in Italy called Lei. LEI is it's the phrase. It basically means woman in Italian. He did a ton of work for them, and he was one of the first people, along with Nick Knight. There was a lot of people, myself included, that at this stage of the game were experimenting with cross-processing. And in the cross-processing thing, this was, I mean, it's commonplace right now, but you see it now all the time, whatever, where skin tones begin to take on this more cyanic character. They're desaturated, and then they've got this sort of like cyanic sort of color grading to them. That all was a consequence initially of cross-processing. It was also a consequence of using, depending on what you were doing, people were playing around with Polaroid, and they were doing a lot of work with Polaroid. People were like, you would develop a Polaroid, you would pull a Polaroid out of a camera, and people would like hit it with a hair dryer, or people would throw it in the freezer, or people were really trying to screw around with the chemical processing that was happening in Polaroid, whatever, and you would get these colors like this, and then now people just do it digitally, but this was all engineered as none of this stuff was done digitally. This image right here is actually relatively current, so my guess is that this has been done digitally, but it's actually a way of mimicking what was happening for the people who were really doing the more stranger chemical work back in the basically throughout the 80s and mid-90s. So at any rate, the other thing that you should know about Palo Reversi, well, we'll get to it in just a second, so I'll show it to you in just a minute right here. And some of this may be happening in this. If you guys can sort of like pick this up, there's sort of especially in this area right in here, you can sort of see a little bit of motion in this. There's a little bit of ghosting in this. What Palo Reversi is really known for, the thing that he was doing that really sort of took him from being a very successful sort of A-tier, but not superstar kind of photographer, was he ended up doing a lot. A lot of it is light painted, and so he did most of his work now still is done with 8x10 Polaroid. So he shoots with a giant format camera, and he light paints, which we've had this conversation before. We talked about it. A lot of this work, it's not only him, but he's got a team of assistants that use really intense LED flashlights that focus really tight. So he's either snooting them with a little cinefoil, or they've got lenses on them that allow them to focus them really hard. And then he goes in and he light paints these things. So he's asking this model to hold still. It can go up to 30 seconds. It can go up to a minute, that kind of stuff. So she can't move in that time frame while they're accumulating enough light in this light painting effort. Does that sort of make sense? You guys sort of imagine this part? And so you get these little ghostings on there. You spot it a lot in people's eyes. You'll see catch lights slightly move, and you'll see little catch lights slightly move in this part. All of this is a consequence of his technique and his style, how he actually light paints. He also is, again, he was consumed, I think, by the whole idea of original, history of photography, as it were. That's why I think he prefers shooting with 8x10. Everything that he does that he can shoot by 8x10, he does. And so he goes back in many ways he echoes a lot of the stuff that was actually happening in the sort of the dawn of photography. So I'm fairly certain he's putting in the majority of the vignetting in this, or though knowing him, he could be actually using a lens from the 19th century. There would be no reason not to. And you guys should know about this, whatever. There's some really, really beautiful portrait glass out there. So how many of you guys have ever experimented with mounting a different lens onto your camera to see what it gets? So there was a guy, I got to tell you this is one, and then we'll get through this really quick, I promise. There was a guy, there used to be a Polaroid camera, and I forget what they called it. It wasn't a one-shot, I forget what they called it, but it was a little plastic camera. And you would take a picture with it and you would pull it out, and the Polaroid that you got out of it was the size of a postage stamp. That was its exact size. So it was just, it was a postage stamp, and it was really cute, and it was like, but it was like, plastic lens, it made I actually got hired by advertisements for this camera. Different photographer to actually shoot these little Polaroid things that they laid on top of the ad work that I was. And they said, oh, he took a. When you see his rig, the lens is bigger than the camera. The lens is like, it's an 8x10, 360 millimeter monster lens that somehow he has gotten connected to this, $5 lens that made these little prints this size. But at any rate, you guys should consider that, because especially in the 30s and 40s, when you look at all that Hurrell stuff and all the Hollywood stuff, all of that stuff, a lot of retouch. Or you could use that 24-105. That would be a great. That sort of makes sense. Anyway, so it's something to think about. I know, Michael, you're not the only person in here who's shooting film, but there's inherent softness to the film that you shoot that you don't get in digital, and that can be something to exploit. And then the lenses that you're using. So your camera, what are you shooting for your film? What kind of camera? RC, okay. So still pretty spanky, but it's a film lens nonetheless. Yeah, anyway, all right. So on and on. But the first time you actually go in and think, I can light that with a strobe in the studio, and you go after doing it, you realize that that's just never going to happen. So at this stage again, I don't think this is the last slide, but we're awfully close. One other thing I will say to you that also happens if you're ever lucky enough to do this, shooting true couture, these are one-of-a-kind gowns. I mean, most of this, you guys already know this part, whatever. If you follow the fashion shows, anything, they're these one-of-a-kind gowns that are built to be signature pieces for a house. And they're all handmade. And again, there's one copy of it, and it's never going to be sold. You're never going to find this in Barney's. You're never going to find this anywhere. It's just one-off, and it's it's a $100,000 gown, and that's cost to them. And they're insane. They're beautiful. They're just absolutely insane. And there's an inherent power in something just photographing that as it is of itself. I mean, part of what makes this image stunning and arresting are the clothes. I mean, this is this amazing piece, right? Now, they've augmented it clearly, the hair and makeup and the lighting and all of that. There's no question about that. But it's amazing how you can take a piece like this, throw it up on a white seamless, stick one big umbrella up and shoot it, and it looks incredible. Yeah. There was a photographer here in Chicago. He's still alive, actually. His name is Victor Skrybneski. Again, I think I've had this conversation with a couple of you guys. Really incredibly became very famous. Probably, other than Stan Malinowski, the most famous fashion shooter in the city of Chicago. And one of Victor's greatest tricks was simply to hit his camera whenever he'd make an exposure. And that's what's going on the left side over here, is that during the middle of an exposure, literally you just do this. This is the camera. And that's it, Palo Reversi. Okay, guys, I'll see you at 1.